welcome two good friends of DMI, two great friends of downtown, to have a presentation and discussion on the Dane County Workforce Housing Fund, which is an initiative of the Economic Stability Council. If you haven't met Rich and Lori, they're fantastic. As Ann said, Rich is the chair of the Economic Stability Council and the current chairman of J.H. Findorf and Sons. Lori Heineman is the president and CEO of the Madison Development Corps and the manager for the Dane County Workforce Housing Fund. These guys are just awesome leaders in our city, and we're so thankful to have them here. So Lori and Rich, the floor is yours, and I'll get the presentation up and going right now.
Okay, excellent. Well, I think since the champion of this whole effort was Rich Lynch, I'll just start with the cover page and turn it over to him to talk a little bit about the Economic Stability Council. I would say that Madison Development Corporation is really honored to have the opportunity to run this fund, and it wouldn't have happened without these three folks on the first page, which are basically Rich Lynch, the chair of the Economic Stability Council, and then also Renee Moe, who is CEO of the United Way Dane County, and these ideas began a couple of years ago. So I'll turn it over to Rich to talk about the history of the Economic Stability Council.
Well, thank you, Lori. I hope everybody can hear me okay. First, it's just so great to be back with DMI crowd. I see a lot of faces and friends out there. You continue to do some wonderful, great work for our beloved city. I hope some of the ideas like the State Street Mall get some traction, and we can do something to help a lot of the businesses down there. So again, thank you for all that you do. My opportunity to speak to you comes after, well, Lori said a couple of years. It's been 4 years that we've been working with the Economic Stability Council. And the genesis of that goes back to the time that I was spending with United Way. I was chair of the board at that time, and United Way was doing wonderful work in our community. And yet it was at one of my last board meetings, I asked the board, you know, how do you feel about some of the issues that we're facing here around poverty? Do you think in 10 years we'll be talking about different things? And the honest truth was, it's just growing, and we have a number of issues in our community that we should be able to get our arms around, and that's the feeling that I had. So I talked with Renee and offered to chair what we call the Economic Stability Council. And despite all the great programs that United Way and all the agencies in Madison give us, we just haven't been able to make the difference that I think we have to get the traction to be able to have other efforts go toward things other than housing and education in the future. So the Economic Stability Council, the idea was to bring together a number of what I call funders. So individuals that have been engaged and generous in the community, but not necessarily the agency yet. We were looking for a process where we could think differently, think collectively, and come up with a solution that was maybe different than the approaches we've been having. So when we looked at the issue, that being poverty, it took a while for me to accept the fact that solving poverty was maybe too big a bite. And it was the chancellor at the university, one of our guests, that came in, and she said, you know, you have to find something you can really dive deep into, find a solution to work on and grow it, and do it well. And so with some great individuals at the table, and I'll mention a few of the names that we had in the Economic Stability Council. We had CUNY Mutual at the table and MG&E. The city of Madison, we had the mayor at that time, it was Paul Soglin, and we shifted over to where Satya came in toward the end. We had Dane County at the table, so Joe Parisi and his representatives, Alliant Energy, UW Health, UBS, American Family Insurance. So we had a lot of players that were very generous in the community and were offering their time. Well, after a long discussion and looking at poverty, what was really apparent to us is there were three areas that really came from poverty that you could tackle. It was education, or employment, or housing. And when we looked at how we could make the first impact, it was around stability. We felt if we could provide housing to individuals that wouldn't leave them what we call housing burden, cost burdened, where they were spending more than 30% of their income on their housing needs, we could make a difference and bring some stability where if you had a job, you had a place to come back to, that you were comfortable in, and it provided stability for family to be there. So the kids that were in school had a comfortable place to come back to that didn't feel like it was too much to pay for, or as I said, housing burdened. So we did a lot of research around housing and determined that there were a lot of programs that were helping housing in our community. And most of you would be aware with tax credit proposals and some of the Section 8 housing and vouchers and things like that. But there was an area which we called the missing middle, which was for individuals that were working individuals, but they were still right at the limit of being housing burdened. And these are teachers and healthcare workers, hospitality workers, a lot of individuals that many of us, quite frankly, took for granted that they were just fine. But in Madison, housing is expensive, and there isn't enough housing at that area where Lori will talk about the ranges that we ended up going into to provide housing for them, that we took for granted that they were just fine. And talking to employers, people like Kevin Conroy at Exact Science, you saw the number of people that they've been hiring, and one of his challenges was they couldn't get employees to come in. They couldn't afford to live in Madison. They were driving long distances. So we decided to try and make an impact on housing in Dane County and look for that missing middle for our area. And so how could we do that in a way that was different than what was happening? There were a lot of developers working on affordable housing, and some of them in the 30 to 50% of area median income. And we were looking for more in the middle range of the area median income. And so we decided that we would try and go to the large employers and ask them to invest in a fund where we could provide loans or equity to projects for developers that would meet the sector that we were trying to reach. And we were very successful. We went out with, quite frankly, $1 million asks, and it was not easy, but we weren't asking for donations. We were asking for investments in a community solution. So it seemed to open the doors for us. We raised almost $12 million in the fund. It's the Dane Workforce Housing Fund 1, and I say 1 because a lot of our discussions were around how can we start something that can get some traction and hopefully go forward. So we hope for Fund 2 and Fund 3. And while we're looking at investing with developers who would borrow money from us or look for equity from us, we're trying to use it very cautiously. So not just giving it to anybody, but to somebody that has what we call a gap. So it's like the but-for test for TIF. If they're right at the edge and they need a project to happen and they just need that extra, and we're anywhere from $500,000 to $2 million out of our fund for any one project, that's where we want to be. And we want to be able to really scrub those projects to make sure that we're not, as some of our investors said, are you just making it a better project for a developer, enriching them with this lower interest money? And he said, and we said, no, we want to make sure that these are projects that really need these funds. So that's where Lori will talk about our process that we use to evaluate different projects when developers come to us for some funding. So I think it's probably time to hear a little bit more from Lori. I just want to say that we had some great help from a lot of speakers. We had people from Milwaukee. We looked around the country for similar ideas. We had people like Imagine Consulting and Forward Community Investments. Stonehouse helped us a lot. Madison Development Corporation, they were at the table and helped us think this through. So I'm grateful to them, and maybe some of them are on the line. So thank you very much. I'm going to turn it over to Lori to talk about the process, and then we can get into some questions and answers.
Okay, thank you so much. So if you wouldn't mind going to the next slide, please, Jason, that would be great. And this is a little bit about what Rich was talking about, is the Economic Stability Council. So this kind of became our base, is just what is the criteria that the investors are looking to make a difference with. And the overall goal was to create 500 new workforce housing units in Dane County over the next 3 years, as Rich mentioned, to complement the other resources, particularly the government resources that are out there actively investing, and to keep those units affordable for at least 15 years. And as Rich also mentioned, we were really targeting that 40 to 80% of the area median income, what we're referring to as workforce housing. In affordable housing, there are many different definitions, but we're defining it as 40 to 80% of the area median income for Dane County. And to give a modest return to socially responsible investors. Certainly we're not equity investors giving a 10 to 15% return, but a modest return on their investment and keep the risk as low as possible. And then, as Rich also mentioned, is to fill that gap in funding that wouldn't be filled by another source but for this fund. We didn't want to duplicate sources. We wanted to enhance and make sure that these projects happened. So if you wouldn't mind going to the next slide. And I just, maybe Rich, you can comment on this, because these are the folks that you brought together. And before we go to the next slide, I think it would be great if you could comment on your members.
Well, I mentioned a few of them, but I was just so pleased that, quite frankly, it was 4 years and they stuck with us. And in some cases, they had to change their representatives. But it's a testimony to the city that we live in, that people were willing to sit down and look for a different solution to what we were doing. Now, it's not the solution. We need a lot of different efforts around housing to make things happen. But you can see the amount of market rate housing that's being built, and that's just as necessary. I mean, at the time we were going through this, it started out and there was a need for like 1,000 units of affordable housing every year that needed to happen for 10 years to even try and keep up. And those numbers changed. People were talking about 2,000 units a year, and we're nowhere near that right now. So housing is needed in Madison across the spectrum, and we're trying to work that gap. And all of these people in the council started to invest their time and learn about what the needs were in the city. So.
Thank you so much, Rich. I appreciate that. So the second item on our agenda is to kind of go a little bit over the fund criteria and to talk about what our goals overall are. So fortunately, we started raising this fund in March, and then the pandemic hit. So Rich gave me a call in May and said, I don't know, I think we can do this. So thanks to his many introductions to the major employers, we were able to raise $11.85 million on a $10 million goal. We have 14 investors, and they are listed in the press release, but they include, as Rich mentioned, many of the major employers, and they are on our last slide that we'll talk about in a few minutes. But basically, here's our criteria. The projects must be located in Dane County. They should, hopefully, this is our first fund. We want to keep it fairly low risk. So we want to have an experienced developer, ideally have 2 or 3 projects that they've done in the region. We want to target households whose area median income is 40 to 80%. And as we mentioned, keep the units affordable, have a gap in funding. And then our target loan size is $500,000 to $2 million. And then we want to fall within an average investment of $20,000 per unit for the units funded. So we don't want to be the primary, we want to be the secondary source of funding in order to make sure that these projects happen, and also to make sure we're making the most of the dollars that we invest in. And then be shovel ready. We're looking for projects that have already gotten their city approvals, they're ready to go. They just simply have a gap in funding so that we can get our money working fairly quickly. And just to kind of give a quick update on that, we were able to, after raising our money, the fund was formally established on September 30th. That was our closing date. We made our first investment the day before Thanksgiving in a 39 unit, and we'll talk about that in a minute. And then another investment of $2 million in a 116 units. So we were able to hit the ground running fairly quickly, and I'll talk about how we were able to do that, and that is on the next slide. So for those of you who don't know about Madison Development Corporation, we've been around since 1977. I've been there for 4 years. I love this organization. We've got a great board, of which Ann Morrison is on. But we're really focused on making a difference in the Madison community through investing in small businesses, through our venture debt fund, and now through this fund, and then also providing small business loans. And the bulk of our business, or our economic engine, if you're talking in nonprofit talk, is really our housing portfolio. We own and manage 348 units of workforce housing throughout the Madison area and with a few properties in Middleton. Our most recent project was the Grass Camp, which is at 1946 East Washington Avenue. It was named after the beloved professor James A. Grasscamp, and the James A. Grasscamp Park is directly behind it, which we plan to rebuild here over the next couple of years. So that's a little bit about MDC. And we worked closely with Whitefish Partner and also the Economic Stability Council to talk about the fund criteria. Once we've had that criteria, we've been out talking to developers, because when we were talking to different funds throughout Chicago, Atlanta, different places that were trying to set up funds, we learned what went right and what went wrong. And one of the things that went wrong in Chicago was that they didn't talk to the developers, and so we spent a lot of time talking to developers about a year ago. And I'm reaching out again to find out what, if there is a need, and what that loan should look like. And so we have the criteria. Once we get together with an investor, we'll talk about, okay, what's your development look like? What's the location? What are the different amenities? And who is your primary lender? So once we get that information, we know they've met their primary criteria. We're really fortunate. We have a technical advisory committee. That technical advisory committee is made up of 13 really highly experienced people that are in the workforce housing field and the legal field here in the Madison and Dane County area. It's chaired by Natalie Erdman, who many of you may know. She has been with the Alexander Company. She was with the city. She's a banker, highly experienced. She's now retired, and she agreed to be chair of our advisory committee. We've got Mary Wright, Dave Porterfield, Mike Flynn, Chris Gillings from Sanair, Don Bernards from Baker Tilly, Tom Landgraf, UW-Madison, Helen Bradbury from Stonehouse, Jess Piat from Old National, Mike Thorson from Adventure Capital, Farshad Maltas from WIDA, and Dive Seiler from First Business Bank, and Josh Marone from Park Bank. And so what we do is we draw from this pool of really talented, skilled people, and then we have the developer pitch to them. And then they ask all sorts of questions and kind of give our team, our internal team, which consists of myself, Abby Wellhouse, and Fred McConnell. And then they give us, feedback as to what to follow up on. Once we follow up on that, we'll go into an underwriting process. And our technical advisory committee basically is just there to give us advice, but not take the deep dive. We take the deep dive, do the underwriting with some of our underwriting partners. And if we feel it's a good fit for the fund, we call an investment committee meeting. And the investment committee is really made up of the 14 investor members who vote their shares. And basically the developer presents to them upon approval. Our team works with our legal team, which is Foley, Wayman Lawrence at Foley. And then also Mike Kenhammer from SVA, who's got a lot of expertise in the tax credit deals. And then we set the loan terms. And typically our loan terms have been basically 15-year fixed rate, 4 to 4.5%, depending if you're nonprofit or for-profit. Interest only for 2 years, and then amortized over up to 35 years. So those have been the terms of our first 2 loans. So if you wouldn't mind going to the next slide. So these are our first 2 projects that we're really excited about. This is a project that was started a couple of years ago and wasn't able to get the full funding, but with working with Wisconsin Housing Preservation Corporation, which is Mary Wright is the CEO, they were able to put together a package with the city of Middleton to get this restarted. For those of you who don't know where this is, it's right across from the Willie Street Co-op in Middleton. It's 6818 University Avenue. There was a lot of pushback from the neighbors because there are some homes across the back. So this is ending up only being a 3-story, 39 unit, which makes the numbers hard to work. However, WHPC was able to strike a deal with the developer, Anthony Gray, and they now are the complete owners of this project. We gave them a $900,000 loan back in November, and the project is now being constructed, as you will see when you drive by, and we expect that it should be completed in May of 2021. So this is our first investment, and then if you wouldn't mind going to the next one. Our second investment, this one was a little more difficult. This is a tax credit project with a lot of players in it. And we like JT Klein's model because he has developed many different properties in Middleton most recently. And so we like the fact that it was a 4% tax credit project. And we like the fact that it's in Fitchburg, so that gave us a little diversity. We have one project.
I don't have any money.
And one project in Fitchburg. This is a 116 unit. It actually broke ground in December, and we anticipate the completion will be January of 2022. So if you go to the next slide, please. So one of the things that the investors wanted was metrics. They wanted to know what their rate of return was. They wanted to know what metrics and were we making a difference. So in our first year, which we haven't even shared with our investors yet, you guys are the first ones we're sharing this with, but we raised $11.85 million. We've invested $2.9 million into 2 projects. There are now 155 units under construction. The average investment per unit is $18,709. Our target, of course, is $20,000. And because Wisconsin Housing Preservation Corp is a nonprofit that does permanent affordable housing, and Limestone Ridge is a WIDA project, a Section 42 tax credit, 4% project, 100% of the units are affordable, which is a huge thing for banks that are looking for CRA credit. And so you'll notice in our investor list, we have quite a few banks. The average interest rate for developers is 4.3%, as I mentioned, that 4 to 4.5%. And our projected net return to investors is right around 2.5 to 3%. Originally, we thought it was going to be a little bit higher, 3 to 4%, but with the interest rates just plummeting over the last year, we expect it to be around 2.5 to 3% after the fees and expenses of the fund. So with that, we'll go to our last slide. And just a big thank you to our investors. As you know, Rich mentioned that the employers came to the table. I just thought you'd be interested in knowing that we just did a survey of our investors, and this group of investors collectively employ over 18,000 people here in the Dane County area, and include WPS, Madison Gas and Electric, Monona Bank, UW Credit Union, Oscar Rennenbaum Foundation, Park Bank, Oak Bank, UW Health, First Business Bank, BMO, which is a nationally chartered bank, which was a big deal for us, Exact Sciences, CUNA Mutual, Summit Credit Union, and of course our partners United Way Dane County, and then Madison Development Corporation is also a small investor. So with that, I would just like to open it up for questions and see if Rich wants to add any closing comments, but we couldn't do this without the investors. We're excited about more projects. We have 3 in the pipeline. Happy to share their locations, and we look forward to helping make a difference here in Dane County.
Lori, I would add just one comment when you were concluding there and said that the returns are around 2 to 3%. I just want to make the point that when we went to these investors, and you can imagine going to a CUNA Mutual or American Family or a lot of the financial institutions, they have an investment team that takes their reserves or whatever funds that they aren't actively using then, invest them in the marketplace. And you go in and say, you know, we want you to invest $1 million into a fund that's going to get you, you know, at that time it was between 2 and 4%. And, you know, those investment people are like, I don't think so. You know, I can get 7 or 8 over here. And that was where you had to really appeal to this community solution aspect. And I will say, I think with every one of them, it took some time. And of course, you're going through levels. You're presenting to the CEO, who then passes it off to the financial people to sort of flush it out. And it was a little back and forth. But as a whole, I think everybody understood this wasn't about making money. This was about making a difference in the community. And so that's where my hope lies in terms of the next fund, in that all of these portfolios of these entities have a range of what they expect for return. Some are fixed income, some are in equities, et cetera. So we appealed to that sector that was more like the fixed income, even though there's a higher risk in this element, and you had to commit it for, you know, 15 years. That's a little different for some of them also. So anyway, kudos to our investors. I give them all the credit in the world for understanding what our mission was and trying to get something done. So questions?
Well, Rich, Lori, I mean, you guys are fantastic leaders for a long time in this community, but this is next level stuff. Amazing, amazing work by both of you. We've got a lot of time for question and answer. There is a new function on Zoom. For those of you that haven't used it in a while, I mean, maybe in the last hour or two, they're in reactions. If you go hit reactions, you can raise your hand, and that'll be the best way for us to get the questions, or you can send those questions in the chat function, and I can ask them. But again, hit the reactions button and you'll see raise hand. So we're going to start with Larry Warman from CNI. Larry, how are you?
Good morning. I actually have 3 questions, which might not be fair, but I guess the first one is, if we're looking at downtown Madison for a project, is there anything on the horizon for this group? Second question would be, what kind of approach have you had to a company like Epic to get involved in this? And the third question kind of, I think, leaves my mind. So let's start with those first 2. Maybe I'll come back with the other one.
Lori, let me first say, there's a great question about Epic, and Epic's name pops up all the time. And we do have them on the list, and Sver, who would have been our contact on that, has shown interest. We had at one point just to kind of cut it off, and which we did. And there is a list of individuals, corporations that have not been in the first fund that will be very interested in discussions around the next fund. So that's encouraging. And there's a lot of other companies that we think can invest. Now, maybe not at the $1 million level. So that's another logistical thing for Lori to think about when you have a bigger pool to deal with within a fund. But yes, we will be talking to some of the larger employers. Around the downtown question, Lori, you can add to this too, but I think one of the aspects that we looked at was there is a lot of market rate housing, as I mentioned, being built in Madison. And if we can encourage developers to look at taking a portion of their market rate housing project, and we'll run the numbers with them, and even if you can get 30 units out of 180 somewhere, and we would invest the dollars to help that happen. So a couple things. One is that provides some geographic pluses in terms of spreading around where these housing opportunities are. And secondly, it does require a developer to do a lot more work. Their market rate is different than affordable housing, where you're having to capture incomes and set rates and confirm that and be able to audit that, et cetera. So there's work that goes into it, but that is an area where we could, quite frankly, penetrate a lot of different projects if those developers are willing to. And some handle affordable housing and market rate housing, and it's not a big deal to them. Others that don't, it's asking them to take a leap with us. So Lori, what can you add to that?
Yes, thank you for the question. I appreciate it. So regarding the projects downtown, we actually had 2 projects. One was right downtown, and another one was on East Washington. We just couldn't raise the money fast enough. Though both of those projects were able to fill it with other sources of funding, because one of them went to a complete market project. It was going to be an affordable workforce housing. It was 100 unit. It was on East Washington. And because we weren't able to get our fund closed in June or July, which we had hoped, that project went to full market. So, and then the second project was already far down the road in sources of funding, and they had some city money that was involved in it, and they had to close much earlier than our fund could close. So we were really pushing for, we were pushing for a June closing in the beginning, but I anticipate that we will see some projects coming in downtown, and we welcome those. I will say this, we do have 3 projects in the pipeline right now. One is in Verona. So that's probably a good demonstration to open the conversation with Epic. We do have 2 or 3 investors already told us that they would go and fund 2. So right now we've got 2.9 of 11.8 that's been allocated. If we can do 2 or 3 more projects this year, we anticipate that we'll be fully invested by mid next year. And if that's the case, that means we'll start fundraising at the end of this year in order to have Fund 2 ready to go by the end of next year. So the other project is in Cottage Grove, and then there is one on the South Park, in the city of Madison. So those are the 3 projects we have. But quite frankly, we welcome referrals to the fund, and we, and this group could really help us do this, particularly Bill, who's got a lot of developers. We are happy to, I'm actually going to be working with a marketing organization just to kind of put together a real one-pager for developers so that they know what that criteria is and who to contact, so that we can continue to build the pipeline of potential deals.
Excellent. Larry, did you remember your?
Yes, I did. Quick follow-up
Perfect.
question. Are you considering looking for like individual investors to get community investors involved? Obviously, we wouldn't be at the $1 million level, but just to make it more of a community project. I know it's hard, it may be a lot more difficult to amass money that way, but just as a way to get community people involved.
Yeah, that's a great question. And it was something that I put before the Economic Stability Council when we were brainstorming, because my dream was, how do you get every individual in Madison to realize that they have a responsibility in this issue too? And it feels good. But so I haven't lost sight of that possibility. But when you think about the logistics of handling that fund and the reports, and every year, because it's real estate, there's statements that have to go out to individuals and corporations, et cetera. So Lori, that would be challenging, I would say, but I'd say start planning on it, because I think that would be a way to engage people in the community and understand better what some of the challenges of poverty in our community are.
And I would just add to that, so there's different securities rules depending on if you have accredited institutional investors or individual investors, and it brings a whole nother layer of compliance and due diligence. And so I will just say that we're open to that, but we would have to really research it, because we run several different funds. Another one's called the Venture Debt Fund, where we invest in early stage companies like tomotherapy and like Grocery Key, and a lot of the things that are in Starting Block. Actually, Image Mover was in Starting Block, and Pam Christensen, I see her here on the phone. And so they have been fantastic, and we do investments. However, again, those are all institutional investors, because when you bring in individuals, it just brings a whole level of additional compliance. So MDC was really excited about the opportunity to run this fund because we own and operate workforce housing units, so we understand the compliance on that side. And then we also know how to run investment funds. But when you bring in the personal individual, it just brings, again, I'd say this, I used to be the former DFI secretary, banking and securities. It just brings on a whole nother level of expense, which would drive that interest rate further and further down. And that's what the challenge is going to be. But certainly we're open to discussing it down the road.
Thank you very much. Next up, we have DMI board member and downtown resident, Ron Luskin. Morning.
Thank you. I want to do, if I could, a follow-up to one of Larry's questions and then ask my own. Larry and I often find ourselves on steering committees for projects downtown, and we ask about affordable housing, and we often get rebuffed. Rich, you just mentioned perhaps a project that could be 100 units and 30 might be looked at as affordable housing. What about even smaller percentages? Is it practical, feasible to think that if a developer could devote 10 or 15% of the units to affordable housing, that might qualify for your program?
Well, at this point, it probably would fall below that range that we want to invest in any one project. I'm not saying it's impossible. And I think maybe the bigger challenge there, Ron, would be asking the developer to go through all of the mechanics that are necessary for auditing that process for 10 units or fewer. Unless that developer already had that system set up, it would be challenging and probably cost prohibitive for them to do that. However, again, at this point, we'd want to set somewhere where you're trying to get a $500,000 investment in as a minimum. Lori?
Yes, so just great answer and great question. So we did think about this, and in writing, this is set up as an LLC, so we have an operating agreement. In writing the operating agreement, we made sure that those types of projects were allowable. And so 25 units is kind of the minimum. So if you're building 100, 150 unit and you're willing to do 25 units, that's, $20,000 per unit is a $500,000 loan. So our loan sizes are $500,000 to $2 million. And the reason for that is just trying to keep the portfolio. We want to get it fully invested and out the door. So we are definitely open to that. In fact, we do have a project in Madison, and I would consider it downtown, very close to downtown, that it's considering putting up like a 150 unit and making several of those affordable. So it's just it's a conversation I need to follow up on from last year, but that is definitely one of the options that we made available in the fund.
Thank you. And I was wondering, when you do fund a project, are you perhaps requesting that developers think about employing marginalized communities, persons of color, either as laborers with their construction firms, or when their construction firms are hired, looking to make sure that they're using subcontractors from marginalized communities? It seems like these go hand in hand.
Yes, well, I can tell you that in the tax credit projects, like the Limestone Ridge one, Section 42, there is a large component of that in that particular project because of WIDA, right? So our goal is to get the money deployed, make sure that these projects happen, but not add onerous additional regulations on top of regulations. But what we do want to do is make sure that the project is following, doing the income verification, making sure that they've got a solid compliance letter from WIDA that is satisfactory, and if not, just monitoring those things on the behalf of our investors. But I don't see ourselves going to the next level of that level of monitoring or requiring the general contractor to have subcontractors. We've done that ourselves at Madison Development Corporation. We're happy to do that. We are a very diverse organization. We've got a diverse board. We've got diverse team members, and we value that, but I don't see the fund adding that additional layer of regulation.
So I was thinking not of regulation, but just encouraging it.
Oh, yeah, it's definitely always
a thoughtful encouragement rather than a regulation.
Yes, well, we always encourage that. Yes, thank you, Ron. Appreciate it.
Thank you, Ron, for the question. Next up, we have Gretchen Richards from CBRE. Good morning, Gretchen.
Hi, good morning. I've got two questions. One is a total easy gimme, and then the other one's a little harder. So I just want to make sure that I'm understanding that these projects can be anywhere in Dane County. They don't necessarily have to be in a qualified census tract. Is that correct?
Yes.
Okay, perfect. And then the second question is, I see that you've got the 15-year term for the initial fund. Would it then go through a decontrol period and then to market rate, or is there a possibility to kind of renew for a second 15 years? And the reason why I ask is, as affordable projects are going through decontrol periods and coming to market rate, and more and more infill development happens, the opportunities for future affordable housing diminish. So just, looking way in the future, how can we make sure there's still affordable housing?
Yeah, I'll take a stab at that. So what we do is we put a land use restriction agreement on the units that we fund for a period of 15 years. But hopefully, if there's still a need out there for refinancing, we will have more funds available if we're doing, as Rich mentioned, Fund 1, Fund 2, Fund 3. So we anticipate hopefully having some funds available if this is really a need in the community that still exists 15 years from now. But on the other hand, if as they're paying it down, there will be an opportunity to refinance. And if there are other sources that have a longer land use restriction agreement, it'll stay affordable. But it's a really good question. And that is the challenge, is that a lot of these projects are coming out of affordability and they're being, turned into market rate. So I don't have an answer for the fund other than the fact that hopefully we have another fund available to reinvest into the projects to make them feasible so that they remain affordable.
Gretchen, you made me think of two other things that was discussed over the last few years. One was location, and you mentioned anywhere in Dane County, and that's true. But I also think it's important, and usually the developer covers this base, is that you look for locations where you have transportation available, and that's a big issue right now. It's why a lot of these individuals are driving from way outside of Dane County into some of our larger employers, and we're trying to help with that. So the criteria when the team looks at projects, that is something that's on the radar also when they decide whether this is a good project for us to be in or not. The other thing is, one of the things that we wrestled with was, we're looking at multifamily apartments. There was a discussion about single family, and if you're looking for certain individuals, and it depends on what sector you're trying to reach in terms of poverty, but where individuals getting into homes is really important, you know, where they would own those and build some wealth. The other thing that we toyed with was existing buildings and whether you could purchase, renovate, and turn those around and put them into the right sector that were affordable. That's a great idea. The challenge for that is one of our priorities was to accelerate additional housing. And when you take an existing building out of the market, that's apartments that aren't available at that time, you might replace them with more, but still you're not really getting ahead of the game as much as we set as a priority. So just a few of the things that I think are still available out there and should be looked at, but we just didn't take that one on at this time.
Could I just add one thing to that, Gretchen?
Absolutely, Laurie.
Okay, so I'm so glad you said that. I would love some help with reaching out with the different municipalities around the area. I know the city of Fitchburg quite well. I mean, they're actively developing in that team because they're investors in our other fund. But any help that anyone could help with that, I'd appreciate that, because I'm sure that they see a lot of the potential properties that are coming through their zoning area. And if they have a gap in funding, we'd be happy to chat with them.
Perfect. Next question is from the chat. Just a clarification, can you clarify what the tenant's income range is to meet 80% of the median income requirement?
Well, it depends on household size and family size, but I think it's around 67,000 right now is the 80% for a family of four. WIDA publishes the rent restriction levels, and there's also home funds, which is a city, CDBG, which has different restrictions and different dollar amounts. But basically, if you look at the area median income defined by HUD, it's 40 to 80% of that. And in Dane County last year was, well, not last year, but the most recent data from HUD was $100,100 was the area median income. So, you know, people who make 40 to 80,000, but it's really based on household. So if you have couple people in a household, you take the combined income that is on the lease, and that's how you determine it. And the real goal overall for, you know, like the United Way of Dane County is to not cost burden people so that they're not paying more than 30% of their household income in household expenses, you know, rent, utilities, things like that.
Perfect, thank you. Next question is Jeff Tubbs from Findorf. Good morning, Jeff.
Morning, Jason. Say congratulations on your accomplishment here, Rich and Lauren. Just the question I had, and Rich, I think you kind of talked about that you've looked at other communities. I'm just curious, how unique is this model, or did you come across big cities or medium-sized cities that have a model similar to this? So just thought if you could comment on that.
Thanks for the question, Jeff. Lori can add to this, but we did do a lot of looking around to see if there were programs, not even necessarily this fund, that would help us and guide us going forward. And there were not a lot of, well, in fact, I don't think there was anything quite like what we put together. There were, however, some large corporations that invested into housing. You could see that more on the West Coast, where maybe it's Google or somebody, they would start getting into the housing game. We didn't see where that was going to be a solution that we wanted to go toward. There also was a group, I believe in Chicago, where a lot of developers got together and put dollars into a fund, but they were all developers, and they themselves would borrow money from the fund, but it wasn't a community solution. It wasn't necessarily, you know, the corporations in the community. So Lori, that fund, I don't know if it launched, but it was happening maybe a year and a half ago when we first discovered that one.
Yes, well, we looked at the Chicago Investment Corporation and the Atlanta Affordable Housing Fund. The Atlanta Affordable Housing Fund was launched in January of last year, and that's one that is the developer one, Rich. And they raised, I believe, $10 million for a $25 million goal, and they have actively invested in 2 projects. and we have been in contact with them. But that, you're right, it is primarily the developers that are the funders of that. And Chicago, it's a different story. They get a lot of CRA investors, which tend to be large banks. And I was actually referred to them by a large bank because Chicago Investment Corporation has several different institutional investors that help build rehab and help minority owners kind of buy and redevelop and revamp some of the projects. That's quite a large fund. I'm trying to think of what the dollar numbers were, but it's quite a large fund. I think it was at least $20 million. We learned a great deal. They were fantastic to work with. They gave us a lot of insight, what went right, what went wrong. And but the bigger ones that Rich mentioned, like the Apple, Microsoft, if you look at their model, they are deploying their capital through typically development agencies, nonprofit agencies that are already doing development. Whereas this model is unique that we actually have employers in the region that are addressing the issue by investing so that their employees have more availability of housing right close to their work, which makes them more productive. And certainly in like what we're coming up with, another snowstorm, makes it safer for them to be at work if they actually are going into the office these days, right? So those are the two main ones we used was the Atlanta and Chicago.
Thank you very much. Next question is from DMI board member Tanya Ibarra with Step Up Equity Matters, LPA, Tanya Ibarra CPA, lots of different groups. Tanya.
You make me laugh. Hi, good morning. Thank you for being here. Lorraine, I am with the Sun Prairie Community Development Authority, and we're doing the housing study in Sun Prairie and looking at, how to utilize the TIFs and all of that to be able to alleviate somehow the housing needs here. I do have kind of a general question or comment going to it's the same concern I think that the previous not the previous speaker but the one before was asking, that after 15 years all the units go to a lot of the units go back to market rates, and then whether we're really sort of solving the problem of the housing needs, or it kind of just the can gets kicked down the road because in 15 years and we're going to have similar challenges and we're not alleviating or solving the problem long term. And part of that discussion we had at the CDA committee was the idea that there is not a lot of downtown payment assistance programs in Dane County for actually there per the staff. There's no, they couldn't find any down payment assistance programs in Dane County that they were aware of, or we were not aware of them in Sun Prairie. So asking for, I guess, this larger body and these leaders that are trying to solve this problem in terms of like looking to the next solution, so then in 15 years we're not our community is not burdened by the same troubles that we have today. So it's just the idea that TIF money and other programs could be established to help with down payment assistance. And then the other big thing that we discussed at the CDA was these, and I'm glad that you're hiring a marketing firm to help, but like the overall, I guess, how do I say this? The overall feelings or perspective of people when it comes to multi-family units. There is a lot of misconceptions and misunderstandings of, and really misbranding of these type of units within the communities. And it's one of the reasons why we're doing the housing study, is to educate our communities about the necessary and maybe not wish that density in housing is going to have to increase here in Dane County as we take in more people that are coming into Dane County. So just kind of sharing some thoughts and, planting some seeds for what is the next program after this program for all these leaders to work on. Thank you.
Tanya, those were some great comments, and it was almost as if you were sitting in on the Economic Stability Council about 2 years ago when we wrestled with so many different needs in Dane County. One point that you made, I think 15 years is a long time, but it goes fast. I would agree. I'm hoping that this isn't the only thing that changes in 15 years. We need more people to look at other solutions. We didn't even tackle the lower income areas, the affordable housing component, which there are some great nonprofit developers. And one of the reasons we didn't go there is because the state and the city, as they allocate tax credits, the 9% gets snarfed up pretty quick, and those projects happen. And we were trying to reach an area where it was a little more difficult to make things happen, where we could provide that gap financing. But back to the point that there needs to be a lot of thought given to those housing developments that also require services tied to them. And that's a whole nother discussion where, as I mentioned earlier, there are some great agencies in Madison that help and surround some of our needy families that need lower cost housing. But this particular effort didn't tackle that. But there are efforts, but it's not enough. I mean, we need other funds that would focus specifically on that, perhaps, and some other creative, collective impact thinking that might change that. That's where, hey, that's where all you wonderful people at DMI have got to put your heads together. It's doable. It takes a lot of patience and some great partnerships, but it is doable.
Well, I would agree 100% with what Rich and Tanya said. This is a major issue, that if there are properties now that are coming out of their tax requirement period, and I was able to, secure a list of that because it is public information. And we've actually been reaching out to some of those developers, but I think a policy, some type of small subgroup to talk about, what incentives can we put in place to, for future buyers or even the existing owner to keep that affordable, and what types of funds are available out there to make that happen. And I don't have the expertise to figure that out, but my guess is that, as Rich mentioned, there's probably a group that DMI or maybe even the different municipalities, Tanya. I know your mayor, he's fantastic. We've talked with him several times about projects for MDC, but maybe someone could put together some strategies, and we're happy to, discuss that and see what we can do. We'll pivot to what the market needs. And if the market needs some type of source to keep these affordable, we can certainly discuss that at a future fund.
Well, and I know there's a lot of developers on this conversation today, and I think all of them would agree one of the largest impediments to them is securing land for good developments. And we early on, we had the mayor at the table and we had the county exec at the table, and I remember saying, okay, what do you have for land that we can offer to developers to say, for $1, this land is yours, build some housing that fits what we're looking for. And it was like, well, we'll look at it. And truthfully, and I'm not trying to be critical here, but they came back with, we really don't have any land available. And I'm thinking, my gosh, give me, a week to walk around Dane County, and I'll bet you we could find some land that they could carve out a couple of acres here. But again, it wants to be in the right transportation corridor and things. But land is a big deal. So if there are ideas where people can generate, I always think about, the malls. You look at all the land that's surrounding malls, and malls are going to change in the future. And, what are the opportunities? And the key is incentive. If somehow the city, county, landowners can get together and provide some incentive for developers to do some very meaningful projects in the right locations, but take land mostly off of their burden, we could see more happening. So.
Well, Lori and Rich, thank you. This was a fantastic presentation, and thank you for doing so much question and answer. Lots of questions still in the chat, so this is a big topic. If anyone needs Rich or Lori's contact information, we can certainly get that to you right away to answer these questions. If you're interested in working on projects with them, any and all of the above, DMI is here to help. Thank you to all of you for joining us today and being so interested in this important subject. We certainly appreciate it. And remember to join us this Thursday at 8 a.m. for our next What's Up virtual downtown breakfast with International Downtown President and CEO David Downey. Hope you all have a great rest of the day. Thank you very much, and we'll talk to you soon. Bye
Thanks,
now.
everybody.
Thank you.